This year, Kenya also saw huge protests by Generation Z. Young Kenyans took to the streets in June in nationwide anti-government protests. Security forces used tear gas, rubber bullets, as well as live ammunition. That's according to the UN. Dozens were killed in those protests, triggered by the death of blogger Albert Ojwang in police custody. He and his followers were moved to protest economic disparities while being represented by politicians who tend to be in their 60s. Well, joining me now from Nairobi is Joshua Okayo. He's a lawyer who is also part of a youth-led group pushing for political reform and protester protection in Kenya. He was abducted as a student leader following protests in 2024. Thanks for joining us. Joshua, first of all, tell us more about your personal experience of the Gen Z protests in Kenya and how that movement has developed in the last year.
Thank you so much. We started protest on 18th of June 2024. And basically, our main agenda at that time was to occupy Parliament so that then the MPs would drop the punitive bill, the punitive finance bill 2024. So I was on the street on 18th of June. I also went back to the street on 20th of June. And of course, the famous 25th of June 2024. So that was the day that Parliament was breached. And I was part of the group that was within the Parliament buildings. And thereafter, there was, of course, fear and anxiety, and people went back home. And the following day, the 26th of June, I was abducted at my apartment, at my home. And, I stayed in the hands of these unknown people for more than 48 hours. And when I came back, of course, I proceeded with the agitation, because even then, I believed, and so many of us believed, that the things we wanted to achieve or the things we wanted to be done had not been done. And so after the June 25th, we proceeded with some other protests. There was the Nane Nane, which means 8-8, the 8th of August. And then we also had, it's interesting that on a day like this last year, 30th of December 2024, myself, together with 22 other young people, were arrested while we were protesting against enforced disappearances and abductions, which were so rampant at that time. Okay. And on a day like this, we spent in the cells. And we also had the Gen Z protest this year. There was the commemoration, 1-year commemoration of the 25th June, which happened on 25th June 2025. And we also had the Sabasaba, which basically means 7-7. Sabasaba is
right. I recall those protests.
Sorry. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So Sabasaba was also. Yeah.
I wanted to, just sorry interrupting you. I was just trying to get a sense of what those protests. You mentioned several there. What they've achieved in Kenya so far, in your view.
In my view, the first goal was for the Finance Bill 2024 to be dropped. It was dropped. We were unsatisfied with the cabinet delivery, and the cabinet was reshuffled at that time, if you remember. We've also had very particular interest in the young people's involvement in processes happening in the country currently. And I can see in every aspect of government delivery service, or in any boardroom or in any function, there are young people who are being represented. I think because of the fear that should we not have young people in these rooms or in these spaces, they would probably revolt. So There's been sort of an empowerment in a certain way. We have also had
that's Kenya
legitimization. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to kind of broaden out the discussion a little bit now, because it sounds like you have achieved quite a bit there in Kenya, in your view. Can you tell us in what ways Gen Z protesters in Kenya feel connected to youth-led demonstrations that have taken place in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I think what is happening is a generational conspiracy. And young people all over the world are saying that we have seen it done elsewhere and we can do it now, because the issues and challenges we are facing are they're the same. They're not any different from the other. And so because something started somewhere, and I can confidently say that it started in Kenya, the other young people from across the world have also learned through social media that these things can be done, and that if they follow suit, then something will be achieved. So there is an interconnection between or among the various countries where we've seen the young people protesting and demonstrating. And what is interesting is that it has been dubbed all across as Gen Z protest. And the young people have, they have accepted that. So I think it's a generational conspiracy. It's young people across the world saying that enough is enough, and that we've had instances where politicians stay in offices for over and over, but doing nothing, and that it's time for us to speak for ourselves. It's time for us to agitate for systemic change, which we believe is very possible. So there's connection. Myself, I've been in conversation with friends from Madagascar and Tanzania. And this was even before the Tanzanian protests. And at some point in July this year, I visited Tanzania. And we were just having conversations and trying to also understand and brainstorm on how Tanzania can also be woke. I'm happy that Tanzanians, realized their space in what is now called the Gen Z revolution. So it is connected. We have conversations from across the world, and I think it's something that must be appreciated. Sorry, yes.
Joshua, thank you very much. That was Joshua Okayo, Kenyan lawyer and activist, joining us there from Kenya.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let's talk more about those Gen Z protests with Evelyn Mantoiu. She is a research and data manager at the European Partnership for Democracy, a network that advocates for democratic values around the world. Welcome. Evelyn, as the name suggests, these protests are associated with one generation. What's led this generation to take to the streets, and have they really turned out more than millennials or Gen Xers?
I'd say Gen Z is protesting for familiar reasons: inequality, corruption, lack of accountability, and the frustration with political elites. But what distinguishes them from the other generations is how they protest. I would say that unlike past generations, they have built more decentralized, leaderless, digitally movements, and they're more visible, more connected, and more likely to mobilize outside formal political institutions.
Do you think that part of this is because digital technology has allowed the protesters from different countries, even ones with controlled internet spaces, to communicate with each other? And then this transnational solidarity allows them to kind of swap resistance tactics?
Definitely. I think digital connectivity is central to Gen Z protests. Gen Z, they have grown up online, entirely online. They're incredibly familiar with the online environment, so they are able to adapt, and when one space is being closed, they can open another one. They can learn from one another and take action, which is also why we see so many shared imagery as well as shared tactics. They take inspiration also from former protest movements. We've seen that a lot of what Gen Z is doing today has also taken place during the Milk Tea Alliance protests of the 2019. So they're definitely learning from one another, they're sharing with each other, and they're taking action. And when they look around, because they are digital natives, they see that others are facing the same struggle. So that kind of emboldens them to continue to press on.
The Milk Tea Alliance, of course, you're referencing the protests in Southeast Asia and East Asia. Now, have they been asking for anything specific across the various global cases?
I think what Gen Z are asking, they're asking for kind of more accountability and more inclusion. I think Gen Z feels that the political systems that we have and the political institutions that hold power don't respond to their demands, don't represent them, and often they feel that they are excluded from this conversation. So what they're trying to do is to build avenues to show their demands and enact change.
Now, some of these movements have brought down governments. They've been relatively successful. Others, though, have struggled. I'm thinking of young people who tried in Belarus a few years ago, Myanmar, and are trying in the country of Georgia. Are governments across the world taking this generation seriously enough, and should they be paying attention and taking note?
I would say that governments are responding, but unfortunately, often they're not responding by creating avenues for dialogue with young people, but they're choosing to see Gen Z protests more as a security threat. There are cases, as you've mentioned as well, if there have been some partial political concessions, but many see them more as a security threat and opt for repression instead of reform. And in many instances, participation in this protest has come as a high personal cost for protesters.
Now, democracy indices over the past decade show a global decline in democracy and actually a rise in global authoritarianism. Now, looking at these youth protests, does this give you hope for democracy's future?
I think it does in one way. It shows that even when democracy is backsliding and the space for protest is shrinking, that there is still space for innovation and mobilization still persists. So I think that all in all, when you look around, you feel a bit more hopeful, and you see that, well, there are still tenets of democracy that resonate with people, and young people particularly have taken to the streets to show their demands and to demand more accountability.
Evelyn Mantoiu from the European Partnership for Democracy Network, thank you very much.
Thank you.